Let's look a little bit more at the Hanwei Rhinelander. Hey folks, so just a few more thoughts on the Hanwei Rhinelander. I put the, relative to when I'm filming this video, I put the review up a couple of days ago, and there's been some useful feedback and comments underneath that actually, which I thought, so it's pretty much worth doing a follow-up. So the headline is that the Rhinelander is a pretty nice sword actually, and I was particularly impressed. I will talk about the scabbard because I realised I didn't last time. I was particularly impressed by the blade. Okay, so the blade, as I say, this is something that Hanwei seem to do really well these days, is distal taper. Okay, so it's got, it's nicely thick at the base, it tapers off, and it actually has quite, despite the fact it's got a lot of authority, and it is a powerful cutting blade, it's quite a relatively nimble blade and feels correct, and it flexes in the right way. It's quite stable in cutting material. As you see in my previous video, I even cut through branches with it, and it's a strong blade, and I did whack it against some wooden logs. Now, some comments on those. I don't consider that sword abuse because I wasn't hitting very hard. If I hit full welly into those logs, and they were damp logs as well, they're fairly forgiving. It was more really a bit like the Wilkinson proof test, which was completely normal in the 19th century for swords. You get the completed sword and you bash it on a piece of wood at a moderate amount of force just to check that nothing loosens up. And as we saw in that video, what did loosen up was the guard, and that is a common problem, it has to be said, with Hanwei swords. Okay, so that's something to be aware of. A few other thoughts on it. So some people commented that this blade is really good for customization projects, and I can completely see that. Most of my criticisms of this, in fact all of my criticisms of this, are to do with the hilt. The actual blade itself is a really nice blade, and you could absolutely, bearing in mind these are relatively cheap swords as far as swords go, it is a good quality blade. It seems to be well heat treated, it's got good edge geometry, it's got good distal taper, nice weight, historically sort of correct for various periods actually. So you could use this blade on a one-hander or a two-hander. It doesn't have to be a longsword incidentally. You could shorten the tang and put it on a nice arming sword, or even a side sword or basket-hilted broadsword. So this blade has all sorts of potential. Really, really nice blade. In a way, it's a shame that Hanwei don't sell the bare blades actually. Maybe that's something for them to consider. Now, the grip. So a couple of things about the grip. So I heard from a number of people, including Cass, incidentally. So absolutely, so I wasn't sure what the grip material was, and I have to absolutely clarify, it is wood. What type of wood seems to vary. I've had reports from some people that have done customizations on their grips and it's been a light coloured wood. And I've had comments from people who said it's a dark coloured wood. So I suspect that they just use whatever wood they happen to have access to at that time. And probably that leads to some variation in the hardness of compressibility of the wood, which may or may not affect how quickly the guard loosens up. If it's a harder wood, then the guard might be held more in place. The other thing I commented on, which I had feedback from Cass and feedback from other people, these are alloy cast fittings that are essentially kind of probably tumbled finished, and some people really like the modern finish of that. Personally, as I commented, to me it has a bit of a modern look, but you know, some people like that, and in fairness, if you want to customize this with some wet and dry sandpaper, you could give it a hand finished look pretty damn easily, or indeed perhaps you could chemically color them. Although I will say, because these are alloy fittings, from my experience, if you use things like gun blue, it's far more difficult to colour alloy metals than it is a simple steel, a carbon steel or a mild steel. So it might not be that easy to colour them, but anyway, there are various things you could do to customise these if you wanted to. And a lot of people replace these grips. Also, the leather, I commented I don't really like the surface leather. It's quite thin, it's quite shiny, it's not very durable, and a lot of people reported to me that they had the same issues with leather, both on this and on the scabbard. Incidentally, it's the same leather, I think, wearing off. So I would say, basically, that the Rhinelander is a great basis, and for not much more money. I mean, I suspect if they just put an extra $40 or $50 on the selling price and change some of the things, some of the ways it was made, it could be made into a significantly better sword than it is. But that being said, the blade is great. I'm really a big fan of this blade. All of the changes need to be focused on how the guard fits onto the shoulders of the blade and the tang. I personally would prefer to see the pommel a little bit redesigned to make it a bit more attractive or detailed or something. It's just a bit of a blob at the moment. And the grip is probably, I think, the biggest weak point in the sword. I quite like the shape of it, I have to say, but I think they need to make sure they're using hard wood that's not compressible, and probably maybe a cord finish rather than a leather finish. If they can't source nice veg-tanned leather, then I'd suggest maybe a cord finish might look more classy than a leather finish. Other thoughts, final thoughts on this as well. Oh, let's talk about the scabbard as well. So the scabbard, I'm not actually sure what the core material of this is made of. I have been told that some of these scabbards have a fiberglass, I think, body, which may or may not be the case, but basically it's a functional scabbard. It's really stiff. I can barely bend it, so I don't think it's wood. I think it's some kind of man-made material with leather over the top, and then with alloy fittings that again are tumble finished or brushed finished, not really sure which. They're fine, okay? This scabbard does its job. It's very, very strong. It could absolutely be, if you're doing HEMA, it could be used in techniques that use the scabbard as an object in the techniques. Equally, it is very good at housing the sword. Okay, it fits very well. It's not overly thick. It's not overly heavy. The fittings aren't loose. They're nice and secure, and you know, it looks pretty decent. Again, I'm not a huge fan of this quite modern-looking chromed leather, but there we go. That's what you get. And I have to say, it's very well stitched up the back. It's really nice and tidily done, as you can see there. So it's quite, you know, it's quite a classy housing, shall we say, for the sword. So final thoughts on the Hanwei Rhinelander. I understand that some people, due to distribution networks in the last year or two, have found it quite difficult to get hold of these. I wasn't aware of that because obviously I got sent this directly by Cass Iberia, who own the company, and so you know, I wasn't aware of that. These are quite sought after, I've become aware of as well, and I can understand why, because it fulfills a niche in the market, certainly in this price bracket. It's a beefy chopping longsword that performs well in cutting targets. It's a very nice blade, and unusually it has a side ring. Now, I did note some people don't like that side ring, and that put them off buying it. I have to say, for this price point, if you're willing to do a bit of self-modification, this would be really easy to remove. Literally all you have to do, if you have an angle grinder, dead easy, but you could even do it with a hand hacksaw, and you just hacksaw these bits off at the base of the rings down here. So if you just saw through, let's get the focus on the sword, there we go. If you just saw through here, you'll notice that the shape of the guard is actually already shaped to not have that there. So all you need to do is snip these off. You could probably even do it with bolt cutters, and then just grind or file down the bits that are left, you know, so it's smooth. So you could absolutely turn this into a 15th century, even a 14th, no, not because of the pommel, but you could turn it into an early or late 15th century longsword by removing that side ring. But some people really like having that side ring there. I mean, as I said, there are only two big disadvantages to having a side bar or shell or nagel or whatever. Number one, it means that your sword's not reversible. So otherwise, this would be a reversible double-edged sword. So if one edge in use gets slightly damaged or blunted, you can flip it over and use the other side. You can do that, but it means your side ring is now on the wrong side to protect your hand properly. So that's one disadvantage. The other disadvantage is potentially we have some unbalance in the guard, and that can, certainly if we look at 19th century sabre texts, that can lead to the sword not having great edge alignment in the cut. Now I have to say, with a sword of this kind of mass and inertia and balance, that tiny little side ring probably doesn't make any realistic difference. But it's just something to be aware of, that generally speaking, if you have a guard which is projecting more on one side than the other, it can lead to a little bit of twisting in the cut. So you have to work a little bit harder at the edge alignment. So to sum up, the Hanwei Rhinelander, be aware of the guard loosening up issue. Everything else is basically cosmetic. I put this through fairly tough test and it stood up fantastically. Nothing else loosened up, the grip's all fine, it's no splitting in the grip, no loosening of the pommel. In fact, just to interject, while I was in the process of making this video, I became aware of another issue which has developed with this Hanwei Rhinelander that I hadn't even noticed before. So we know about the wobbly guard, and I said that everything else was solid and tight. Well, in fact, while filming, literally, I hadn't noticed this before, I noticed that there is a very, I don't know if you'll be able to hear it, that is not the guard, that's the grip. So there is now a little bit, tiny less than a millimetre, of forwards and backwards movement in the grip. So the wooden core has essentially expanded around the tang, probably from just the energy of cutting stuff and hitting stuff. So this grip is now a little bit loose on the tang. So the remedy for this particular sword is essentially a complete hilt rebuild. You could potentially leave the peen there, leave the pommel where it is, completely destroy the grip to get it off. Then you'd get access to the cross guard, which you could hammer some wedges into the back of to wedge it up against the shoulders of the blade. That's what I'd advise, some small triangular metal wedges, maybe of a softer metal. You could use mild steel or you could use brass or copper, and then rebuild a whole new wooden grip on here. So essentially the blade, great, but both the grip and the guard leave a lot to be desired. Everything else is good. This sword is good to go. I can take it out and do another cutting session with it now. I could take it to war. The blade is fantastic on this. I just think that Hanwei perhaps wants to look a little bit more at redesigning how that guard marries up to the blade, and possibly at redesigning the grip, and that's pretty much it. So I hope this has been useful and interesting to you, and I'll see you soon again for another video. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.